Welcome to Adventures in Producing. I'm Wendy Mitchell. I'm here talking to another brilliant independent producer who is Karin Chien. She is a producer and more. She has worked on films including Stones in the Sun, Jack and Diane, Exploding Girl, Circumstance, Motel, Robot Stories. She works very internationally. It's hard to keep track of where she's living at any given time. I love that. And she has worked with Art and Action, which made global short form socially relevant content. She is the founder of dGenerate, or dGenerate, depending on your pronunciation style, which is the North American distributor of independent Chinese cinema. Gosh, they've worked on more than 70 titles in partner with Icarus Films. Karin won the Piaget Producers Award at the 2010 Independent Spirit Awards. She has advised and consulted for Lucasfilm, Sundance Institute, New York Times, IFP, Tribeca, CineReach, ITVS, Rockefeller Foundation. She has taught producing at Temple, Loyola Marymount, NYU, SVA, and more. So she is not at all just a producer, as if that's not enough of a job. But we'll talk mostly about her producing today and also hear a little bit about how she's working with Louverture Films. So thank you, Karin. Gosh, I'm tongue-tied after that introduction of so many jobs.
Thank you, Wendy. It's so great to be here. And thank you for doing this series, highlighting the work of producers. It's still very, it's an unknown world for most people still.
Yes, that's what we're trying to go behind the mystery here. So how did you get started in producing, and why was producing a good fit maybe than some other roles in the industry?
That's a great question. I get asked that a lot, especially when I was the only Asian American face in the room or in the field. And people would say, you didn't just one day decide to become a producer, did you? And I said, maybe, yeah, I think that is how it happened. I went to Berkeley, UC Berkeley for university, my undergrad, and you come out of Berkeley with a very politicized consciousness. It's a requirement of graduating. And I will say that my first love is literature. It's reading. It always has been, and maybe always will be, but I didn't want to work in that. To me, that's pleasure. And of course, now reading is very much part of producing. But back then, I really understood film to be the dominant cultural paradigm. I wouldn't say that that's true anymore, to be honest. I think that that's shifted at least twice or three times since I've been producing. But I saw that that was where culture, American culture, which also in some ways is part of global culture, right? Where those battles were being fought. And I went to school, I graduated Berkeley in 1997, and Asian Americans who were working in film back then know that to be a really auspicious year, because 3 Asian American feature films came out that year, and that was like a revolution. And those filmmakers are people I really looked up to and inspired me to think about Asian American cinema. And my generation is also the generation that was really influenced by Wong Kar-wai. When Chungking Express came out, it just blew everyone's minds. So I started to see what was possible in cinema. I had taken one class at Berkeley by Lonnie Ding, who was a pioneering Asian American documentarian, maybe the first documentary filmmaker. And she had a class in which we had to make a short film. And through that very small experience, and also through films like Strawberry Fields, made by Ria Tajiri, I started to see somehow a future in this space. And I thought, without any knowledge of the industry or the business or the work, I just thought that I could be a producer and have a career at that. And at the time, I didn't know a single person or a single thing about it. So I also put myself through school by working multiple jobs, which is continued as a theme in my life. And I just needed to make money when I graduated. So I took a job at a startup. And the startup was actually one of the best places I could have learned how to be a producer, because producing in the US is very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So I knew that I needed that experience. So I stayed at the company for a year and a half.
And this was like a
And
tech
then
startup. This was nothing to do with media or?
it had nothing to do with media. It was like a due diligence finance startup, not even technology. It builds database software as part of its business, which I learned. I learned how to build databases to do that, and then moved myself to New York, which in 2000 was where independent film was really centered, and then just dove into the indie film world.
Yeah, no, that's amazing to hear your story. Not a very traditional path in, but I like to hear how everybody gets their start. So yeah, those 2000s in New York, I was there working at IndieWire, and I think I first heard of your films with Robot Stories by Greg Pak. So how did you meet Greg, and what was the experience of working on that film?
Yeah, very briefly. So, after I landed in New York, I tried very hard to get an unpaid internship. I tried very hard to work for free on the film. And that's when I realized how competitive this business was. It was a good introduction, to be honest. And because I had spent 2 years running a startup that became like the leading national firm in their field, I brought a lot to the production office, and I always tell my students that the production office is a great place to learn how to be a producer. So I started as an intern. By the end of this film, I was their accountant, and I worked as a crew member in the production office for a year and a half, production coordinator. And then after a year, I either had to join the union or I had to move on. And I just kept moving on. I never stayed in one position more than one film because I knew what my end goal was, producing. But a year into being a crew member, I think I just really missed reading and missed like this kind of immersion in literature. So I wanted to stay in New York. I went to Columbia University because they have a 1-year master's in literature. I actually tried to do it while I was working on films, and that
Oh
was
my God.
I realized I couldn't do that. So I did the 1-year master's, and when I graduated, I wanted to start producing. And the last crew position I held was a production coordinator, which is a department head, but still, I wasn't even a production manager yet. And I got this email randomly from something called the Workshop, Asian American Filmmakers Collaborative. And it was really not something that I had heard of. And, working as a crew member, I think I'd met 2 other Asian Americans the whole time, even in a place like New York City. So I went to the meeting and I thought, well, this isn't for me because it's for writers and directors who are presenting their work and getting feedback. It was interesting, but I just didn't think it was for me. But everyone went out for drinks afterwards, and I sat down next to someone named Greg Pak. And what's hilarious is on the other side of Greg sat this woman, Susie, who later became his wife. So it was a very momentous,
pivotal night at the bar for Greg Pak. Wow.
Very pivotal night. And Greg turned to me and said, "I'm looking for a producer." And I said, "I'm looking for something to produce." And I read his script, and his script is what drew me in because the script was beautifully written, but also it didn't feature a single female character who was, a waitress, a sex worker, all the typical roles. And I thought it's a really interesting science fiction anthology about love, about family, about death.
Amazing. And first of all, I'm going to skip around because you've produced many works, and especially like some of the shorts and things I'm not going to talk about. But can you tell us about Motel? Because that was another one that I remember from those New York days. That's directed by Michael Kang.
Yeah, Motel is a great film. I'm really proud of that film too. And Michael Kang is a friend of colleagues of Greg's as well. I should mention that Greg is now an extremely successful comics writer. He writes for all the comics, I think.
I wondered what happened to him. Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, very shortly after Robot Stories, his agent found him a gig with Marvel, and then the rest is history. So he's a superstar in that field.
Great.
So Michael was a colleague and friend of Greg's also, and when I was in post-production on Robot Stories, Mike would call the office and ask for Greg, but I would answer the phone and Mike would say, oh, since you're on the phone, what would be how would you handle like finding extras in Rhode Island? You know, so then we would talk and then he would just keep calling with these questions, production questions. And finally we went to lunch and he said, do you want to produce, you know, be a part of producing my movie? And I took the gig in large part to learn from the other producers. I knew that I had something to learn from, it was Matthew Greenfield, who's now, you know, head of Searchlight, and also Gina Kwan, who's also at Searchlight now, you know, heading their TV division. And Gina and I became very close friends on that film. And the Motel, because it was a location shoot, and we all stayed at a different motel, it was, you know, some of my best friends in the industry came out of that production.
Yeah, and this is you know, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask somebody for some free advice, and you never know. Well done, Mike, you know. So another film that followed was Undoing by Chris Chan Lee. And this is a bit less sort of artsy indie and a bit more gritty action indie, I guess.
Yeah, I really liked what Chris was trying to do in making a film noir. And Chris is one of those 3 filmmakers from 1997 who really, you know, jump-started my interest in cinema. So it was a really great opportunity to be able to work with someone like Chris and to do something where, you know, I mean, Greg Pak used to say this really well. He would say, we don't wake up every morning thinking of like, I'm Asian American. What is my identity crisis? You know, we wake up, it's all the desires that drive a human being. You know, whether it's food or sex or it's love or
a car chase or something.
A car chase or something. And so I really love the idea of exploring genre filmmaking, you know, that with an Asian American story. And Sung Kang is the one who brought me into that. So Sung was one of the actors in the Motel, and we became really good friends on that. And Sung, you know, also is in the Fast and Furious franchise. So Sung was a producer on that and brought me in. So another very low budget Asian American film. Both Undoing and Robot Stories are 2 films that we self-distributed in some way. And that's where I learned about distribution, which formed the foundation of starting my own company later.
Amazing. And I think that's so rich to be able to work in production and distribution. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Bradley Russ Gray, amazing independent filmmaker. You worked with him first on The Exploding Girl and then on Jack and Diane. How did you fall in with Brad, and how did that collaboration go?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that I was in post-production on Undoing, and I got an email maybe from Scott McCauley, or a phone call from Scott. And Scott said, there's this filmmaker named Bradley Russ Gray. Are you interested? I think you would be a good producer for him. And Scott was right. We actually started Jack and Diane first, but Jack and Diane had such a tortured, long, difficult development period. And there was a very low point in that 7-year process. And Brad said, I just have to make something. And that something turned out to be The Exploding Girl. And The Exploding Girl was such a liberatory and instructive experience, because we just went at it with whatever we had. We made the film for $39,000. It's inspired by Ho Xiao Shen, his film Café Lumiere. And we also looked at how he made that, which was with like 10 people. And we tried to kind of have the same methodology and the same spirit. And Zoe Kazan was a big part of that film. She and Brad essentially created the character and the story together. So it was just an incredible experience, from concept to Berlin Alley premiere 1 year.
Amazing. I mean, that sounds like an inspiring way to work, but also, you know, at this point in your career, are you also like, my God, wouldn't it be nice to like get some proper money to, you know, make something on a slightly bigger budget, or was that not the case with that particular film,
Yeah, that film was special, and it was different, and it was
Yeah.
we knew the Diamond brothers, who had one of the first Red cameras, and we just thought, what can we do with that? But yes, you're absolutely right. There's only one or two of those kind of films that a producer has in them,
Yeah.
because it just
It
takes too
depletes
much.
you, doesn't it? You call in so many favors, and
You have to call in favors, and you have to figure out how to share the responsibility with different, I mean, that shoot was 17 days. So it's like, you can get through it. And also the film was only a year, but it's weird, because it's in some ways easier to make that film for $40,000 than to make a film like Undoing for $300,000 that is trying to replicate the apparatus of a regular film production, but just in like the least resourced way possible. Whereas with the Exploding Girl, we were trying to take this very different model and make it work. So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the light footprint model that can create a sustainable practice of independent filmmaking.
And then did the success of Exploding Girl help Jack and Diane finally get made?
Perhaps. I think it did. Jack and Diane really came down to the cast, because the script was kind of out there for like any sales agent. They love to use this term, execution dependent. So that's what they would read it and say, we love it, but it's execution dependent. Yes,
that's essentially them saying, we don't want to take a risk.
Exactly.
You can take the risk. We'll look at it after you've taken the risk. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So it did help that Brad had a feature under his belt that was at Berlin and, got great reviews. But Jack and Diane was just always a tough one, because it was this film that had so many different elements in it. We had animation by the Quay brothers. We had creature effects by Matthew Barney's creature effects guy. It had a lot going on.
Yeah, but it exists. So well done. You stuck with it. It eventually was made. Another big film in your career, or that I think was big in your career, was Circumstance. And yeah, how was that a challenge to get off the ground, or were people more willing to back Maryam and her vision?
That was a challenge in every aspect of every way that you could describe. I didn't even know certain of these challenges existed until I worked on Circumstance. It was not a film that people got behind easily, no. But Maryam had this incredible short film, maybe one of the best short films I've ever seen, for sure. And her work convinced me the script is smart, it's really brilliant, but the production of it could not have been harder. Everything.
In what ways? Just logistically, like on the actual shoot, or financing, or?
It's a story set in Tehran. We couldn't film there. We filmed in Beirut. We had to film undercover. The police and military were constantly coming to our set. We had undercover, we had ways to disguise what we were doing. I had to smuggle all the film negative out of the country. Just on and on. We went into pre-production with $25,000 in our bank account also. So we were raising money. I wrote this article about the process of making that film, and I called it The Amazing Race, because we were raising money up until the moment we sold the film at Sundance. And even that sale was really unique, because it was the first acquisition by Participant Media. It was their first foreign language film. And Circumstance became the first foreign language film to win the Audience Award at Sundance for the US dramatic section.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it was, we were lucky because there was a reward at the end of this very hard road. But I remember, Wendy, when we wrapped production, I flew back to New York, and I slept the entire plane ride, and then I went home and I slept for another 30 hours. Like, I went to sleep on Saturday and I woke up on Monday. So yeah, that one took a lot out of me.
Goodness. I would encourage you to go listen to my chat with Katja Adamit about Wolf and Sheep, which was supposed to be set in Afghanistan, and they shot in Tajikistan. It sounds like some similar absolutely insane production circumstances. But this is one of the reasons I need to let people hear production stories. One other film, just as we're going film by film, is Patricia Benoit, Stones in the Sun. And this is a story about Haitian immigrants, a Haitian story. How did you get hooked up with Patricia? Did you shoot it all in Haiti? And
yeah, we did. Yeah, this was another, it's funny because I would say like the first half of my career, it's like the filmmakers would find me. I started to gain this reputation, I think, of doing impossible films, you know, like impossible to finance, impossible to sell. And I remember I was at dinner once and this young Asian American person came, like recognized me and started to pitch me a rom-com. And the producer next to me was like, let me just stop you right there. Like, unless your film is impossible, like life-threatening, Karen's not interested. And, you know, the second half of my career, starting maybe with, you know, Scott McCauley introducing me to Bradley West Gray, a lot of all those projects came to me from other producers, which I'm very flattered by. You know, Circumstance came to me from Gina Kwan, and Stones in the Sun was Jay Van Hoy, I think, who connected me, to Patricia. Yeah. And when I was at Columbia doing my master's in literature, I studied exile. I studied how women writers who had escaped dictatorships or authoritarian regimes wrote about their experiences in exile. So Stones in the Sun is about exile. It's about that experience of exile. So I felt really connected to what it was. And I was, you know, just very interested. And we shot a few days in Haiti, and that's the part where I was the producer on the ground. And it was really kind of an incredible experience because we couldn't find all the usual things like a fixture or a lighting company or anything, to be honest. So we ended up working with the one film school that's there, and the students are adults. It's like more like a vocational school, and they became our crew. And there was nothing that happened that I think they would have considered a problem. Like their problem solving skills were off the charts. So this is important because I think process, like the process of filmmaking doesn't get talked about enough. And as a producer, that's something that's just as important to me as what story we're telling and the creative development of it, the politics behind it. But as a producer, it's like, I might be going to Haiti with $100,000, which in filmmaking terms is nothing, but in other people, like normal people terms, $100,000 is a lot of money. So that's my responsibility. How do I spend that money? Where do I invest it in the community? And you have countries like South Africa and Jamaica where producers go and the traditional productions will hire the technicians. So you have investment into the production infrastructure, but who's investing into the creative infrastructure? So that's a really important question. Who's investing into the cinematographers and the directors and the writers? And I think that's really important.
So on that film, were you able to hire, you know, Haitian HODs, or did you hire Haitian people who were sort of in the mix of the crew?
It was the school. They were our whole crew.
That was just the whole thing.
Yeah, we brought down a few positions. I asked the school, I said, what do you not have people trained in? You know, so of course we had the cinematographer because he was the through line. We had the first AC. We had a gaffer. You know, the same thing in Beirut. You know, when we went there, I said, let's only bring the positions that they don't have for us. Yeah. So that included the sound mixer because they don't always record sync sound, you know, in that part of the world. Included the script supervisor, but everyone else, I wanted to use our money, whatever little we had of it, to invest in their infrastructure.
Amazing. Yeah, just a really thoughtful way of producing a film too. Speaking of thoughtful, you know, you've worked with so many filmmakers of color, Asian American filmmakers. You've worked with a lot of female filmmakers. I'm very curious. You talked about these 3 Asian American films that were sort of made an impact in 1997. Did we have 3 great Asian American films in 2020? You know, how is the industry? Is the industry looking different to you now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The industry's changed in a way I don't think I could have could have imagined. You know, and I took a break from producing between 2012 to 2020.
Yeah.
And that during that time, the industry transformed. So what the kind of attention and investment in well, I shouldn't say producers, but filmmakers of color is incredible. I mean, to see someone like Lee Isaac Chung, who was in the times of scarcity, you know, with the rest of us in the early and mid 2000s, making his films for $100,000 or $200,000 as well. So to see him be given the resources that he's always deserved, you know, to tell the kind of stories he's always been able to tell, and also to have that recognized, and to have his films seen is huge. It's fantastic.
Glad to hear there's some good developments. Yeah, we mentioned you took a break from producing. You were running things like Art in Action and dGenerate and doing other work, and as I mentioned, teaching and consulting. How does all that work, particularly the sort of distribution knowledge you have? How does that inform what you do as a producer?
The distribution, by the way, I learned is very different than producing. It's like a completely different personality type that is drawn to distribution. It's someone actually, Eric from Roadside Attractions, who was a producer before he became a distributor, he described it really well. He said distribution is like a 9-to-5 job and producing is like a roller coaster. And I could not agree more. And I started the distribution company with 3 others in 2008, which was at the height of I was producing in the Haitian film and circumstance at the same time, and starting this company that was smuggling out films from China to distribute them in North America, and really learning how does a distribution company work, and also trying to create a distribution company that would center the filmmaker. That an equal part of our mission is twofold. It's to bring films about China made by Chinese filmmakers, unmediated by Western perspectives, to North America. Like, let's see China through the eyes of Chinese filmmakers. But this equal part of our mission is to send revenue back to those filmmakers so that they can keep making films, because they don't have access to their domestic market. So we had to figure out financially how to make that work while building the company at the same time. And one of our first partners was actually Amazon, which is crazy to think about now, because now they're ending that service that allows you to just upload your film.
Yeah, especially for the documentary side of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but we wouldn't have started our company without that. So that's how much things have shifted. And the distribution work, so it came out of what I learned self-distributing Asian American films. But it has really opened my eyes to this part of the business. And it's since then I've learned, oh, this is actually where the power is concentrated. Traditionally, whoever has controlled distribution has controlled the industry. And it's because distribution determines what gets seen and who gets to see it, which determines what gets made and who gets to make it. It's completely circular. And I think the pandemic has exposed that supply chain of how interconnected it is. I think it has to some degree. But yeah, at one point I realized we were reinventing the wheel by starting a distribution company just for these films. Because to be honest, if you can distribute a film from one country, you could distribute a film from another country. So I have stayed on with the acquisitions of the independent Chinese films, and now we work very closely with Icarus Films.
Okay,
so
that's still going strong.
That's still going strong, and we've just expanded to include Hong Kong,
for
obvious reasons.
Yes.
And we have a film about democracy that happened in a village in China that was out in virtual theatrical release earlier this year, called Lost Course. And we have that film that's most recently out. And 2 films we have coming up are 2 protest documentaries made by a collective of anonymous Hong Kong filmmakers. And I can't tell you how honored I am to work on these kind of films.
Yeah, I was honored you introduced me to anonymously to some of them, and I got to speak to them anonymously about some of their work. And just, yeah, amazing what people will sort of, yeah, putting their lives on the line to tell a story, and you're helping that reach the world. So yeah, really important work. Thank you for doing that. You're also, as you mentioned, sort of gearing up on the producing side again, and you're working a lot in collaboration with Louverture Films, Jocelyn Barnes, based in New York. Why was what Louverture was doing a good fit for your personal taste?
I cannot think of a company whose films I like and respect and admire more than Louverture's. And I think Jocelyn and I met when Circumstance and her film Black Power Mixtape were both at Sundance at the same year. And just from the moment of meeting Jocelyn, I really respected her worldview, her taste, but just her understanding. It was very global, and mine is too. And it didn't necessarily start out that way, but it's how my producing career developed. And it's really important to me to have that global perspective. And it's not necessarily something a lot of US producers have, just because of the way the financing works in our industry. You don't have to, like, if you're a producer in Europe, you work with other countries. It's just part of the
and
game.
you get soft money. Yeah.
You get soft money. And in the US, it's just really different. So unless you go out and seek that kind of experience in producing or financing path, which I think that US producers should, to be honest. I think that there's a lot of value that US producers can bring to international co-productions. So we both have that in common, you know, and just a lot of respect for her and what the company and Danny Glover, what they've built. And thankfully, Jocelyn had respect and admiration for my work too. So it was always, we were always aligned. It just wasn't until 2 years ago that we started talking about working together.
Yeah. And, you know, I think they've worked a lot in documentary, you've worked a lot in fiction. And I think when they announced you were going to work with them, that they said they want to move into more fiction, but I think you're also maybe open to doing nonfiction. So can you tell us anything about the slate you're working on?
Yeah, I don't know how much we can say, because we do have a series of announcements that will be coming out soon. So hopefully, maybe even by the time this is posted, more information will be out there. But but you are right. Like, they brought me on to help the company expand more into fiction. And they have been a part of a number of really successful global art house fiction. So outside of the US, they might even be known more for their fiction work than their nonfiction work. But like Capernaum, which is Oscar nominated, right? So they've played that role, but we are very much looking at fiction features and fiction series, and not putting any limits on what the company can do. And I think with our combined forces, we can take on, I always like to say, like, if you can produce an independent fiction film, you can do anything. Like, you can, maybe not surgery, but like anything within the film industry, once I produced an independent fiction film, the idea of, start a distribution company, I can do that.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, we're really excited. We have a ton on our slate, and just really grateful to be working with the filmmakers we are.
Yeah, I'm grateful to also, like you said, have that international outlook that I think all of you have. I'd like to end these interviews. One slightly silly question, but not really silly. Do you have any pet peeves on set? What do you not like people doing on set?
I'm going to say two, because one is general, one pertains to me, but I have a pet peeve when, you know, I understand, like, a lot of the crew are aspiring filmmakers, but I believe really strongly in doing your job and doing it well. And my pet peeve is if somebody starts to backseat direct when the director is directing, and that just causes it just causes tension that's not necessary. And the other pet peeve I have is something that happened more when I was younger, but I remember like the second film I produced, I was the only producer on it. And that, by the way, will be the last time I produce something alone. It was just too hard. But the lead actor would come onto set every day, and the way he would greet me is, I was 28 years old at that time, and again, just my second film, and he would say, "Oh, pretty producer, hi, pretty producer," and that's the only thing he would say to me all day, each day, and it was just really annoying. I mean, people now might call it harassment, but I just, you don't. How do you respond to that? It's just it was a very belittling thing that he would have said he was just paying a compliment. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hope that attitudes or just awareness of how that could be perceived have changed by now, but still, I'm sure it happens to some people. Yeah, like, oh my God, that is so annoying. Yeah, you're his boss.
Thank you.
And the other question I like to ask people, and you've already mentioned this a little bit, but what do you think people misunderstand about what producers actually do?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of your previous interviewees said this, and I would agree. It's like, it's almost everything, I don't think people understand at all what producers do, and it's because we do so much. We do it all, and it's part of what draws me to the work is I think that it's impossible to be good at every aspect of producing because it's the creative development. It's, most people can only understand it as bringing the money, and that's a shame. That's all they think producers do. But yesterday, someone was describing how a certain writer's room worked on a well-known show, and there were 5 people in the writer's room, and the three of them would just be part of the conversation, and 2 of the writers would go off and write everything. But the 3 people were really useful for bringing in the ideas and helping develop the story and the characters. And I just looked at her and I said, that's what I do as an independent producer every day. You sit there and you talk to the writers and help them think through certain things. So that's one part of 100 that we do.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, more than 100 on some films,
That's right.
I think. Thank you, Karin, for joining us. I've been watching your career for decades and just thought you've had such a fascinating mix of films and projects. And yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit about what you do. And we can't wait to see what comes next now that you're back in the producing chair. So thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. I love chatting with you.